Hey there, welcome to the Theology of podcast. I'm Benjamin.
And I'm Riker.
And we're two college students who love studying scripture and having meaningful biblical conversations.
When we think about theology, most of our thoughts probably stay within the four walls of the church. But in doing so, we're really limiting our understanding of God's infinite nature.
And so each episode will be tackling an everyday, secular-seeming topic and discussing what the faith has to say about it both conceptually and practically.
So thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to buckle up, keep your hands and feet inside the proverbial vehicle at all times, and enjoy the ride.
Let's go. Hey everybody, thank you so much again for joining us here on the Theology of. We are so excited to once again have the Arcadian Wild here to finish off our conversation on the theology of creating with a part two and a little bit more practical, I guess. We've talked about some big thoughts. We've talked about a lot of really big ideas and like what creating is and what creating could be and creation in relation to your music and stuff like that. But I think for the rest of us, it would be great if we just talked about some practical application and maybe looking at creating in this image of where we fit into the grand puzzle of scripture and of creation. So let's I don't know, let's just kick it off a little bit with a question. I think is how does the fact that we're made in the image of an image making God affect the way that we create in our day-to-day lives?
I think that's such an important question for us to ask ourselves every single day. I think there is a lot of temptation, especially in our circles within the church, to sort of have this really low view of human beings. Kind of going back to where we started this conversation in the fall of human beings that we see depicted in the third chapter of Genesis. The world is like really just torn apart by the failure of man to be what God created him to be. And I think that does like color our view of like who we are as people. And there's definitely a conversation to be had of nature, like what comes naturally to us as people. Like, are we, and that's a rabbit trail you could fall really deep into. Like, are we intrinsically good? Or are we intrinsically evil? And I think like a lot of the time we sort of skew like, okay, we are, refuse, like we are really like bottom feeder kind of creatures. And I think, obviously we're all aware that, we do bad things and like the inclinations of our hearts are evil, but I think if we really believe what's written at the very beginning of scripture, like, okay, this is the part, like this is where God chose to start telling his story and the story that he's writing with us. Like, he made us in his image. And what that means is that he created us to be something really beautiful and really wonderful. And at the peak, at the pinnacle of all created things, like, he kind of saves the best for last. Like, that's how the story is set up. Like, and like, that hasn't changed. I think we've done a lot to distort the image that he's bestowed on us, but it's still there. And, like we sort of mentioned earlier, Isaac wrote that line, like in the last movement of Principium in Winter, like, I still look like you. We still look like the God who made us. And so I think, a lot of the time we hear language about like what we hear when we hear excuses for like bad behavior or like a failure, and we say like, oh, I'm only human. And I think we need to like turn that on its head. And Isaac, I've heard you talk a lot about this, and like to say I'm only human is like an inversion of what human beings were made to be. Like, instead it probably ought to be like, I'm a human being, like made in the image of God. Like I can do this. Like like being human is the opposite of an excuse. Like it is a charge to like to rise to the occasion and to do uncomfortable things and to grow into who God made you to be. Like it's not a cop out, it's not an excuse, but it's this like grave responsibility that we have, and it's wonderful. Like I don't think I know it would probably be really easy to feel overwhelmed or crushed by the pressure of that, but I think it's so important to recognize how beautifully and wonderfully we're made, and not just like see ourselves as these like low creatures. Like I think we were intended to be the highest thing, just a little lower than the angels, at least on this side of eternity. So I think I'm only human needs to be struck from our vocabulary.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of going along with that. You said like we have this grave responsibility. I think that carries over to the way that we create, like specifically to the level at which we try to create. I think we have a responsibility to do our best, to put it simply, that we have been made in the image of a perfect God, and we are wonderfully made, and we are complex and on purpose, and each subtlety has its place and is intentional and sophisticated in exactly the way that it ought to be. And just even from a biological standpoint, it's kind of amazing. Not even kind of, it absolutely is amazing that the pieces fit together the way that they do, and that we don't die like every day, which is crazy. That when I think about it, like, how have I been alive for 25 years now? That's insane. But just the way that carries over to the way that we create, I feel, having recognized this truth that I've been made in the image of God, then I feel that, okay, now whenever I make things, I feel a responsibility to pour the same level of care and craft into the job, into the work, with love and adoration, with the utmost confidence that this is going to be great. And I just don't think that we can settle for anything less than our absolute best, whatever that may be.
Right.
Yeah, I love that, because it goes to show that not only are we impressed with attributes of God like kindness and these different components, but one of those is the very fact that we can make images ourselves. That's what the creative process is. And obviously it looks different from the way that God does it, but it should still reflect that and be an outlet that God continues his creation. And so, that being said, what do you guys think it looks like to act as God's creative agents and harness our creativity for him and his work?
Well, yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the primary difference in the way that we create and compared to the way that God creates is that he can do it all by himself. Yeah, and he can do it perfectly. And that, we can't, in our attempts in our striving for excellence in the work that we do have to recognize that we alone cannot achieve that. And so I think that then once we recognize that, and once we kind of get down on our knees as a creator and come to grips with the fact that we need help if we're going to do this right, and if this idea that we've been given whatever it looks like, if it's going to evolve the way that it needs to and arrive at the place that it's supposed to, we have to call on outside sources and outside power to make it happen. And at least an aspect of an answer to that question is just being acutely aware of when we are making something that it's just so tempting to like take 100% ownership of it. Whenever it's like, oh wow, this turned out really good. I think this thing is pretty cool. Whatever it is, wow, look what I did, man! I'm so cool. This is awesome. That's such a tempting thing to do, and is dangerous and is false, and just in our, as we're doing so to the best of our ability, we are reflecting the work that God did in making us back at Him. And I think just we have a responsibility as a creative agent, as you put it, of God's, to constantly be whether it's in a really direct way through the art itself, or just in a more subtle internal way as the creator, constantly be pointing back and acknowledging that we did not do this and we cannot do this by ourselves. This has been given to us. I am a steward of this gift.
I love that. That reminds me of a quote that I think exemplifies this whole idea of partnership and maybe even co-creating, I think is a good word. Like, there's this guy, his name is Makoto Fujimura, and he has this kind of whole blog and a couple of books, and like he has this whole thing that he pours a lot into called the Theology of Making. And he has a quote, and it says, "There has not been much written about exactly what it means to co-create into the future of God. And by co-creating, I do not mean that somehow we have the equal weight of power or knowledge to co-create with God. God is the greatest power there is. So what does it mean to co-create? To co-create means to be invited to a dance, invited by God's grace to be on the stage, to step into a journey of new creation that we do not yet fully understand. For mysterious reasons, God chooses to depend on fallen creatures to steward God's gifts, as poignantly signaled by the incarnate child in the manger, who, though he was God, needed human help to survive. Through this weakness and vulnerability, God incarnates into the world full of danger and violence." Which I think captured so well of just, Jesus was fully man, fully human. We joined into that life of his, and we too, again, like you were saying, cannot take any of this onto ourselves fully, but rather everything and in anything that we're doing are co-creating with the capital C creator.
That's such a wonderful reflection on what we're talking about. And I mean, I feel like that's basically our whole conversation in just that paragraph. So he communicated that very effectively. But
I end the episode here.
Yeah, that we're done. That was it. But I mean, there's so much there, and like two things that jumped out to me from that just now are, he talks about being invited by God's grace, and when again, like going back to Genesis, it's all Genesis. This whole conversation
it really is
just like, because I mean that's where it originates. Like like our God generates the world, and like that one act of creation sets in motion everything. But when God makes our world, at each day, there's the pronouncement of, and he saw that it was good, and like in each thing that he creates, he says that it is good. And I think I once had a Bible professor say that it's important for us to notice that God doesn't say it's perfect and it's finished. Like I think we have a really idyllic view of Eden and what it what it was. And I think we misunderstand it sometimes because it wasn't the ultimate end. Like he didn't make that and he was like, this is how I want it, and then it fell apart. But it really was a beginning, and we didn't hijack it because we're not that powerful and we can't actually exert that much control. But we, again, kind of going back to distorting the image that he, made us in. But we've mucked it up a little bit, but it's still in motion, and he's still in control of it, and it's gonna go where he intended it to. But like even before the fall, there was this grace present and this willingness for God to show up and make something and to enjoy it in its unfinished state, to enjoy it being in process. Like he made it knowing that it wasn't where he ultimately had in mind for it to go, and made it with the intent of working on it for a long time, which I think is amazing. Like there was like, in a way, like there was grace before sin. Like that's nuts. Like that his grace, like, pre-existed our fallenness, which is so wonderful. Like it swallows up our fallenness on either side. Like we can't get away from that grace. And I think for him to have that approach to creation from the very beginning is so wonderful. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about, at the time that we're recording this, we've started the new year, but we're not too far away from the Christmas season, just behind us. And for this year, I feel like the story of the Advent and the Incarnation like hit me a little differently than it has in years past. And I've like thought a lot about Mary and who she is in that story, and the responsibility that she's given. And when we think about the Incarnation, God chooses to be carried inside of a teenage girl in like ancient Israel. Like this girl with like really not a lot of status, zero status. She has zero status, and she's not even married yet, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be low, and it's not going to look good. But he chooses her, and he doesn't, when she's visited by Gabriel, like there's not really like, hey, God would like to do this, and is this okay? Like he just says like, this is happening. Like there's not really like permission, like, though he wouldn't have chosen her were she unwilling, right? Like, she's not like, oh yeah, this is great, this is exactly what I was hoping for. But she says like, okay, like here it is. That's we're going to do it. But like God, in a very literal way, like God chooses, this is so crazy. Like God chooses to be born into the world that he made. Like, and God is like physically made manifest through his people that he chooses. Yeah. And I know like this isn't a new thought, obviously, but this year I've been thinking like, okay, in what way is God asking me to be Mary? Like and like in what way is he asking me to carry like his presence to term in myself, and to allow it to like gestate, and to like for it to be formed and like made manifest in a physical way in the world. And like that's like brought me to tears like several times in the last few months, like just with like the magnitude of that, and like, and how how like unworthy I know that I am to do that, like, and to be that vessel, and to like, we have to be careful about like the language that we use in describing these things, and like trying to pick them apart and understand them. But like the ways in which like I'm called to like to mother God into the world, like that's such a weird thing to think about. One, as a male, like speaking for myself, and then two, again, like acknowledging like our humanness and our brokenness, and not using that, as we mentioned before, like as an excuse, like, but we're human beings made in the image of God, but like we still have to grapple with like our fallenness and like our ineptitude, and like how much we rely on God's grace. And but like we all need to be Mary. Like God is asking us to like carry this for me for a while, and like give it life, and like love it into being, and like help it find its place in the world. And I think that's an aspect of what we're doing, like as believers, as disciples of Jesus, when we are creating anything. Like we're kind of Mary. We're all kind of Mary, I think.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful mystery. And really that's at the heart of the gospel, right? God choosing to love and pursue people who aren't worth it, or like who don't show any reciprocation, and yet he still works through them and to bring them back to him. And kind of that whole concept you were talking about, Lincoln, with Mary, I think it applies to this quote from another artist who probably runs pretty similar circles to y'all's, also from Nashville, Andrew Peterson. And in his book Adorning the Dark, he talks about this journal entry he wrote one night. And it says, "I am convinced that poets are toddlers in a cathedral, slobbering on wooden blocks and piling them up in the light of the stained glass. We can hardly make anything beautiful that wasn't beautiful in the first place. We aren't writers so much as gleeful rearrangers of words whose meanings we can't begin to know. When we manage to make something pretty, it's only because we are ourselves a flourish on a greater canvas."
I am so happy that you pulled an AP quote. That book is unbelievable. That's been like such a wonderful gift that he's given all of us, and it's honestly, we Isaac and I talk about this a lot, but we just admire him so much. And he's, you want to talk about like someone who is a good steward of the gifts that they've been given. That's like, that's Andrew Peterson all the way. Like he's such a wonderful songwriter, and he's such a wonderful gatherer and celebrator of people, like, and he's in the last few years, he's just become a really wonderful friend and counselor for us personally. Like we're so grateful to like actually know him and like get to pick his brain sometimes. And he's been so kind and so generous with us. But I think that's so insightful. Like just recognizing that, nothing that we have, everything that we have has been given to us. We haven't earned any of it. Like Isaac and I were just talking earlier about like, we're both like in our, mid 20s, and, trying to figure out like, where are we going to live, and like, how are we going to make money and survive and all this stuff. And he said like, do you ever think we'll get houses? Like, do you ever think we'll stop living in apartments? And I was like, yeah, I think we will. Like, and you're about to be living in a house, like sort of taking care of it. It's for someone else, but you'll have a house though. It's not yours. And you said like, yeah, but it's not mine. I was like, yeah, but isn't like anything that we have, like our like possession of it is at the end of the day just an illusion. And I think like a similar principle applies to the stuff that we make, like Andrew talking about, like we can't make anything beautiful that wasn't beautiful to begin with. And I think, like, I don't know, those descriptors of, you said agents earlier, like creative agents and stewards or like mirrors, like reflecting God's image, or like kind of using like language of, we're conduits or channels of like God's creative energy and spirit. And in some ways it takes the pressure off, because we recognize like, oh, I don't have to like generate anything from scratch. Like I can't create something out of nothing. Like I'm really just receiving and then, sending that off into the world. I'm almost more of like a transmitter or something like that. But I think that's such a wonderful reflection of the invitation that God's given us to like partner with him and do the work that he has been doing and is doing and will continue to do forever.
I've never wanted to get a tattoo of stained glass before. You just read that out loud. Now I want to get one of those. It's I also think it's cool just whenever I'm creating a mental image, as you were reading that quote, of also how the stained glass like provides color to the light as well, which is kind of an interesting added layer to, one, imagining all of my favorite writers as toddlers slobbering on wooden blocks is just
Right.
kind of funny, but also reassuring. But then just sort of, building up something, and then not only for the stained glass to shed light on it and illuminate, but also just by the nature of stained glass, and to illuminate with color and like vibrance. I just think that's really cool. Yeah, I'm gonna get that tattooed like on my face. Like
the next time we see you, it'll just be
just gonna be
You might want to consult your wife about that.
Yeah, we'll see.
So we've been building up this picture of what it means to be God's creation, and also to, as a result of that, create ourselves. But as we continue, I think there's this dichotomy that we have to address. One, the fact that currently creation is in a marred state. And like you guys were saying earlier, that doesn't mean it's completely destroyed. We can still bring glory to God through our creation, but right now it's marred. And then at the same time, God is redeeming it until that final moment when he perfectly redeems it. So first, as we talk about marred creation, I think something that a lot of us, when we think about musical artists, something that jumps in our mind is this idea of writer's block. So what does that look like for you guys? How do you experience writer's block, and what do you do when it does come up?
Have you guys seen those like masterclass ads for like, I mean, I know they have like so many different courses, from like gardening to directing to voice acting to
chess playing.
Chess playing, which is like everyone's watching the Queen's Gambit, and it's like, everyone's like learning how to play chess. But I feel like one of the earlier ones was one that I think Aaron Sorkin does, and I think it's just writing. Yeah, it's one of the writing courses, And I haven't even watched the course. My wife and I are like go through some like masterclass stuff. Like I think she's sharing a subscription with her mom, but I haven't even actually gone through that one. But I've just seen the advertisement for it, and in the ad, like Aaron Sorkin says, "Writer's block is my default position," and I think that resonates for sure. At least for me. I think my default tendency is a total vacuum of inspiration. Like and I have to sort of overcome this like immense personal like spiritual inertia in order to get going. And once you can sort of climb over that initial hurdle, some really special things can start happening. But I think for me, yeah, part of it is just the fact of the world that we live in right now. It's so technologically driven. We have emails and texts and phone calls and FaceTime and Instagram and Facebook, and just we're so inundated with communication and stimuli and information, and it's really hard to sort of like quiet all of that down and retreat into yourself for a moment, because you're always getting some sort of notification about something, and sometimes it's important and sometimes it is just useless and it holds no sway over the course of your existence, and it's just garbage. Most of it's garbage. And kind of going back to the idea that we're like almost like transmitters for God's creative spirit. Thinking about like radio waves, whenever you're trying to catch a signal, you have to like tune the radio and manipulate the dial so that you hit the right frequency. But if you're not on the right channel, or like you don't have the right equipment, or your antenna's busted, or like something needs repair, like you're not going to get the signal that you're looking for. And I think that kind of carries over into creating, especially as believers, like when we're disconnected from like ourselves. We're all like running around in masks for most of our lives, and then we have those handful of moments of clarity where we get to show people who we really are. Like we're brave enough to do that, and it's like the right moment and the right person, whether it's like your friend or your spouse, or you're like a moment with your parents, or like maybe you write a song where you can finally be really honest and say something that's been eating you or like trying to get out. But for the most part, like we're being our false selves, and we're trying to overcome that more and more, and like find out who we really are and let that come out. And I think for me, like I have to just like take time to really be quiet and sort of unplug from all the noise. And I have a great need to like be alone and to really feel that I'm alone. My wife Shelby and I both work from home. She's a photographer full time. And so like, especially during this season, we've been home a lot, and that's been like mostly great. Like we've loved getting to have so much time together, but with us both being home like 90% of the time, like it's really hard for me to feel like I have space and like the sufficient emotional safety to write, even with my wife in like the apartment, and she's not even paying attention to what I'm doing. Like she doesn't care. She's like the least judgmental person in my life. Like she knows me and loves me and cares about me and wants me to succeed, and like holds nothing over my head, and is like so supportive, like fully endorses everything that we're doing. Like it's great. And like tries to be really like respectful and non-invasive when I'm like trying to get into a groove. But like even knowing that there's like another person like somewhere in the vicinity like throws me off. and that has nothing to do with her. Like that's everything to do with me. And I think it's really important to like sort of withdraw, to find ways to withdraw into yourself. One of the songs off of our last full length record is called "Silence a Stranger,"
Right.
and it's silence, comma, a stranger, not silence a stranger. Like gonna knock him off, make him sleep with the fishes. But silence is like to us a stranger, especially like in this time, and how we so desperately need this. There's a, oh man, I can't remember the author. There's a book my dad gave me called "Ordering Your Private World," which is a kind of a cringy title. It's like a very self-help title, but it's a wonderful book. Like the author talks about like how there's, we all have this like this inner this vast inner world within each of us that's almost like bigger than the physical world that we live in. It's maybe it's like a piece of eternity that God's put inside each one of us. But he sort of likens it to a garden, and he says, we need to spend time caring for that space and like planting good things that are fruitful, and to nourish them, and to see that they grow properly and that they're well loved, and to be careful of like allowing things to sort of decay, or to for weeds to grow, or for someone else to plant stuff in your garden that isn't supposed to be there. And I think that's so important. And I think, a lot of the blocks that I run into are, I think they're weeds, and I think they're invading plants in my garden, bristles growing up amongst the roses and the sweet potatoes and the bell peppers, because that's what I want to eat.
That's what you want to eat.
Yeah.
Well, I think that actually lines up really well. Like, and Isaac, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. Like, in that kind of vein of the weeds or somebody else planting something in your garden, like, what about criticism? Like, what about the negative side of things that, or even as you were talking about with the space that you need to create, like what happens when somebody invades that space in a negative sense, or like just as artists, like how does criticism affect you?
Yeah, it certainly does. Probably, and of course I'm just speaking for myself, but I feel like Lincoln would also agree with this, that it's like probably like 7 times out of 10 the most critical voice is ourselves, like the one in my own brain telling just hounding me about how terrible that idea was, or how you're just wasting your time, or whatever. Yeah, I totally agree with what you were saying, Lincoln, just about writer's block being the default. And it seems like if our expectation is that writer's block comes and goes, then it has lots of power whenever it does show up. But if we can accept it and expect that it is more a natural state of being, then whenever we arrive at it, then it has no power. And then we can shift our focus, rather than feeling defeated by it. We can shift our focus to finding ways that we can combat it. And sort of like you were saying, like, okay, let's create space. Like, let's find a way to be alone. Let's find a way to like purge like the negativity and all like the self-criticism and criticism from others and outside sources that's coming in. I think that writing and creating anything it's such an emotional and spiritual experience. And that of course it is. but it's so easy to be just beaten down by like your own heart or your own brain, by yourself, if you're not taking care of yourself, from an emotional and spiritual standpoint. um it's almost like writer's block is given, is like, it's one of its source of power is that, like, the self-criticism, then the negativity that comes in and is, and says, you're not like good enough to do this, like you're not worthy of stewarding that idea, or like you can't take this nugget and like turn it into something good. That's not going to happen. And then all of a sudden you hit a block, and I think that it's, at least for me, it's been, I agree with Lincoln that it's always such a helpful practice to create solitude and to seek out silence, and and yeah, to sort of grapple with your expectations, and to be okay with just with sitting still, and to be okay with not making something that's good, because again, if the expectation is that is what comes first, and that like you then have to choose to counteract that, then it just becomes so much easier to sort of step over that negativity.
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it, because it shows that writer's block and this inner critic that we have, it's all the manifestation of the curse in Genesis 3, right? The ground is going to be tough and weeds are going to come up. But that doesn't mean that we just, put down the pitchfork and just stop. But we acknowledge that, and then from there continue to strive and to do the work that God's put in front of us.
So we've talked about marred creation. We've talked about kind of the idea of being co-creators with Christ. And I think it'd be great for us to talk about redeemed creation. Where does redemption fit into the overall creative process, our individual creative processes? And how do we continue to glorify God just as we create on the day-to-day basis?
I like to think of having the gift, or like having been given the ability to create as a human, is that was like the weapon that we were handed to fight against the curse and the brokenness. That was sort of like, that was the tool that God gave us to enact redemption. And it's sort of in the same way that his first act of creation was to combat the darkness and to say, like, okay, here is light. Here's like, we can now see. It's, I think that there's, I at least I like to think that when we make something, that we are sort of doing that. We are like like lighting a candle somewhere in a dark room, and that with each act of creation, whether small or large, we're just getting a step closer towards totally wiping out the darkness and the brokenness, which is such a humbling thing to consider, but also a really exciting thing to consider. And I think also gives a whole extra layer of purpose and significance to the more like mundane acts of creation that we find every day, and a sort of, that there's when we decide to create a clean room or, like organize our things, or to like make our bed, or to mend a broken relationship or something, that each one of those is just a constant pushing back against the brokenness, and a constant like welcoming back in the redemption that is to come. And yeah, I think that's such a cool a cool thing, and yeah, definitely drives my motivation to keep writing songs even through the blocks that we talked about, and to just sort of it's like stand up to the inevitable and natural struggle that we face whenever we try to push back against the evil that is in the world. That is a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
but to know that like that is one of the most powerful ways that I can participate in the redemption of the world, a small, like sort of cooperative role in that act, is that, yeah, that is fuel and power and reason enough to like continue like wading through the difficulty that comes with creating.
Isaac's father-in-law, Doug McKelvey, is a songwriter and an author. And a few years ago, he wrote this book called Every Moment Holy. And it's a collection of liturgies. And it's really beautiful. And it's for anyone who hasn't heard of it, it's sort of this it's this collection of meditations for like just a lot of moments that seem kind of mundane, that we don't like pay attention to. Like there are liturgies for like making your first cup of coffee in the morning, or like when you get stuck in traffic and you're tempted to have a little road rage, or like mowing your lawn, or changing a baby's diaper. Like they're just, and they're all really beautiful. And one of them I think is for the planting of flowers. And he sort of, he describes like the digging of a small hole in the ground and like dropping this seed inside and then covering it up. Like the planting of this little seed is an act of war, which I think is just bananas good. Like just, that's ridiculous. Like, it's not dramatic. It's not violent. It's not, it doesn't like demand attention. It's this like, it's one of the most like imperceptible, its smallest actions, but it speaks volumes to where we're going and like who we're called to be, and like the world that God has invited us into and promised to us. This like this burying in the ground of something that's like technically died, which is, that's us. Like, are you kidding me? Like that seed is us, and that like dead seed being buried in the ground and then growing up into this like wonderful thing that like may even reproduce in and of itself, like depending on what flower you're planting. Like it's such a wonderful picture. Like that is an act of war against darkness and against death. And like I think the more we can find ways to be like that seedling planted in the ground, whether it's a flower or a tree or like a fruit bearing plant, like whatever it is, like whether its purpose is to like feed and provide nourishment or just to like make the world a little bit more beautiful, like that is a declaration of war. And I think it's such a fitting description of what we're called to do as as creative people made in the image of God, which again is all people. Like they're not creative people and normal people. Like we are all gifted with that. That is not unique to a category of person. That's all of us.
Man, that's so good. I actually have Every Moment Holy on my shelf right next to me.
Me too.
It's so wonderful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you're right. The creative things that we do, we're engaging in battle against the curse and bringing the kingdom back on earth as it is in heaven. That reminds me of another book about creativity, probably the best one I've read so far. It's called Images and Idols. And in it, they talk about the way that God uses creativity to redeem and to point forward to what's to come. And in it, they say, as we wait for the kingdom to come, God uses our creativity to prop this world's doors open to the next. And so as I think about your guys' music and your creative process, it's so cool to think that as you are, writing melodies and coming up with lyrics, that is theologically rooted, and it is pointing people to what's to come. So yeah, that's such a mind-blowing idea.
I think another one of the ways that God invites us to participate in the redemption of creation, and I guess like redeeming creative acts, like co-creative acts along with him, is connecting us to people, and which is, that's basically the church, just like creating the church and connecting us to one another. Like it's kind of amazing to think about just in the last few years for us, the trajectory of relationships that like have influenced like who we are as a band and like where we go and the kind of opportunities that have been given to us. So like Isaac met his wife Ella in 2016. Yeah. So Isaac met his wife Ella in 2016 and they fell in love and got married, and it's like really great. But then like there are all of these relationships that develop just because Isaac married his wife. Like it's kind of nuts because, through Ella, we then became connected to Doug, and then Doug is part of the Rabbit Room community here in Nashville, which is just this wonderful group of people who are all believers and like really committed to basically what this whole conversation has been about, like recognizing who God is, like following his lead and seeking to emulate his creative spirit and energy, and to like bring like more and more of heaven into this world, and like and these like small like declarations of war that we've been talking about, like poets and writers and artists, like musical artists and filmmakers and all of these sorts of people. So like we connect to Ella, we connect to Doug, we connect to the Rabbit Room, and then we connect with Andrew Peterson, and then through Andrew we met this guy named Drew Miller, who's a wonderful songwriter here in Nashville, and he's a staff member at the Rabbit Room as well. And for a brief time, like I started playing in a band with Drew called the Orchardists, and I was filling in for their old mandolin player. And then through that, like we met the first guy who like really started playing bass with us in the band, and we like made a record with him. And then like the guy who produced the Orchardists' last record and that's the guy who made Finch in the Pantry and Principium with us. And it's just like, it's wild, just like the network of people that we've been gifted with, and like God has put those people in our lives in order just to, like, I think, to help us find him. Like they're like markers on the trail to heaven. Like, and I think we all have that opportunity for people. Like we all have an opportunity to like be signposts on the interstate to redemption, for all of these people. And again, like it's kind of sobering to realize that, like, oh man, like I could be like a life or death sign for somebody. Like, okay, sharp turn coming up, like watch out, or like, hey, this way to the good stuff, like it's just been really incredible just to reflect on how drastically these small moments or events have like influenced the course of our development as a group, and just as disciples of Christ. I think it's amazing. Again, like we cannot say enough good things about the Rabbit Room, about people like Doug, about people like Andrew, and Andrew specifically, like as we said before, like he's such a wonderful creative person, such a great songwriter and sharer. But like another one of his gifts is he is such a wonderful gatherer of people. Like he really brings people together, and it's amazing to see, what comes of those like small little, like, oh yeah, you need to meet this guy. Do you know him? Yeah. Oh man, you guys would be great friends. And he's like, he's right. Like, and these amazing things happen. So
whenever I met my wife, that was probably the time in my life that I felt the least in control of my life. I think I was just kind of slapped upside the head with the awareness that God has not stopped creating in my life and in the world around me. That it didn't start, he didn't enact and then that was it. That it is a continuing collaboration, and that he is still constantly every day creating more and more strings of the web, connecting people, creating opportunities for us to create. And it's just having been on the receiving end of that, and having been just found myself caught up in this sort of creative scheme that he has going on. It seems like the very least that we can do is, whether it be through writing a song or through planting a flower, is to try to push and reflect just a little bit more of that back into the world. Yeah, it's kind of wild that the web is vast and so complicated, but so on purpose. Whenever you look back on it, just the way that we've all been connected, and everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to.
That's awesome.
So there you have it. What an incredible topic and conversation. Lincoln and Isaac, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you guys haven't heard about the Arcadian Wild, about their Principium project that they just put out, make sure to go check it out. It's on Spotify, Apple Music, all those good places. And we'll also link it below in the show notes.
Thank you guys so much for having us. It really is like an absolute honor and a pleasure to get to talk about this with you guys.
I second that.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And thank you, Benjamin and Riker, for inviting us to be part of this conversation. It's been such a blessing to get to talk and share together about this topic. It's so important. So thank you all for tuning in. and exploring it with us. We'd so deeply appreciate it if you would go check out our new EP, Principium. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, or any other platform that you listen to music on. You can also learn more about what we're doing at our website, thearcadianwild.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram or Twitter, and you can catch our semi-annual tweets. You can also check out the resources for this episode below in the show notes. Such wonderful resources that the guys have provided for us on this topic. You can also email any thoughts or questions you have to thetheologyof@outlook.com or on the Theology of social media accounts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.